She was a billionaire in a wheelchair. He was a single dad waiting for a bus in the rain. These were the facts as she saw them from the window of her accessible van at 11:40 on a Tuesday night in Nashville, a man she recognized. The new facilities coordinator. She had hired him 6 weeks ago, standing at a bus stop on Division Street in weather that had turned from drizzle to serious rain. His jacket inadequate for it, his posture, the particular posture of someone who has learned not to fight the things they cannot change. She told her driver to pull over. She did not know, opening the van door and calling his name across the rain, what she was starting. She was offering a ride. She was doing the thing that a person with a warm vehicle did when they saw someone they knew standing in the rain. What she was actually doing was opening a door that had been closed for 18 months. What she was actually doing was beginning. If a stranger ever offered you kindness you didn't expect, drop a heart below and tell me what city you're watching from. Joel Baptiste had been a music teacher for 6 years. Not a glamorous kind of music teacher, the kind that worked in a middle school in Antioch, on the southeast side of Nashville, teaching general music to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders who were mostly there because music class came after lunch and therefore before the afternoon's more demanding subjects. He had loved it with a completeness that surprised people when he told them, because the popular image of a talented musician stuck in a school job was of someone waiting for something better. And that was not what Joel was. He was someone who had found the specific thing he was good at, the meeting point between his musical knowledge and his capacity to understand what a 12-year-old needed to hear, and who had organized his life around it with the satisfaction of a fit that was genuine. He had also written music. Not commercially, he was not a person who confused his gifts with the scope of the market for those gifts. He wrote because he heard things. He heard melodies in the way certain people heard color, as a constant ambient feature of experience, and not writing them down felt like leaving something unfinished. He had filled notebooks with melodic fragments and chord progressions and lyrics that were mostly not very good, but occasionally, in the specific way of the occasional thing, right? He had started teaching himself piano at 7, from a neighbor's upright in the apartment below his parents in Memphis. He had moved to guitar at 12, to composition at 16, to the understanding at 22 that he was not going to be a recording artist, not because the music wasn't good enough, but because the music was his, private, not designed for the market, but for the specific private purpose of making sense of a world that sometimes moved too fast. Writing music slowed it down. Writing music made it legible. He had been a music teacher for 6 years in the Antioch Middle School and had never once regretted not being something more commercially legible than that. The students were the thing. The specific moment when a 7th grader who had never thought of themselves as musical discovered that music was not a talent you had or didn't have, but a language you could learn. The same way any language was learned, by exposure and practice, and the specific patience of a teacher who believed the language was worth learning. Joel believed it completely. He had never stopped believing it. He was not a person who confused his gifts with the scope of the market for those gifts. He wrote because he heard things. He heard melodies in the way certain people heard color, as a constant ambient feature of experience, and not writing them down felt like leaving something unfinished. He had filled notebooks with melodic fragments and chord progressions and lyrics that were mostly not very good, but occasionally, in the specific way of the occasional thing, right? Anya had encouraged the music. She was a physical therapist, practical and precise, with the kind of intelligence that organized itself around the functional rather than the beautiful. And she had loved the music in Joel the way that complementary natures love each other's foreignness. She had listened to him play on Sunday evenings, when the week was done and Cora was asleep, with the focused attention of someone trying to understand something that would always be slightly outside her native language. She had kept the last notebook in the kitchen drawer, the one where she was writing down what she heard him working on, the one she said was her archive of him. He had not known she was keeping the notebook until she was gone. He found it in the drawer 3 weeks after her death, her handwriting on the covers, his melodies in her notation, imprecise, loving, occasionally wrong in the way of someone transcribing a language they heard, but didn't fully read. He had taken it out and sat with it at the kitchen table and understood that it was an archive of the last year of their life together, rendered in her hand, and that she had been keeping it without telling him because she wanted to preserve it not for him but for herself, because she loved it. He could not play after that. Not for a while. Not for what became 18 months and counting. The music went somewhere he couldn't reach it, behind the wall that grief built, in the specific room in himself that had been constructed from loss and sealed. He had kept the last composition notebook. There were 7 others, going back to his 20s. The 7 others were in a shoebox in the closet, and they stayed in the shoebox because they were the past, and the past was not what he needed to carry. The last one was different. The last one was on his person the way Cora's emergency snack was in his bag, not because he used it, because leaving it somewhere felt wrong. He had tried 3 times in the 18 months to open it and finish the song. The first time was 4 weeks after Anya died, when he thought that finishing things was what you did. He had sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open and had looked at the blank bars for 40 minutes and had closed the notebook and put it in his bag and not tried again for 6 months. The second time was on Cora's 5th birthday. He had thought, Anya would have wanted you to finish it. He had been wrong about what Anya would have wanted. What Anya would have wanted was for him to finish it when it was ready, not because a date required it. He had opened the notebook, looked at the blank bars, understood this, and closed the notebook again. The third time was the night before the interview at Ellison Sound. He had not known why he'd tried that night. He had taken the notebook out of his bag and put it on the table and looked at it and thought, tomorrow I'm going to interview at a music company. And then he had thought, I don't know if that's the right thing. And then he had opened the notebook. He had looked at the blank bars for a long time. He had not written anything, but he had looked at the blank bars in the way of someone who was no longer afraid of them. He had just looked at them, neutrally, in the way you looked at a thing that you had not yet arrived at, but that you understood was still there. Waiting, he had closed the notebook. He had gone to bed. He had gotten the job the next day. He had kept the last composition notebook, the one that was his, with the song he had been working on when Anya died, the last song, the one that had stopped in the middle because the person who listened to it had stopped in the middle, and without the listening, the writing had stopped too. The last 2 bars were blank. He carried it everywhere. He could not explain this fully, even to himself. He carried it in his bag the way he carried Cora's emergency snack and the backup inhaler she didn't need, but that he kept anyway. It was a thing that had to be on him, present, within reach, not to be used. To be there. He had taken the facilities coordinator position at Ellison Sound 18 months after Anya died, when the math of his teacher's salary and the cost of Cora's aftercare and the mortgage on the house that was now his alone stopped working without the second income. He had applied for it with the specific practicality of someone who had done the math carefully. The salary was better than the school district's by 40%. The hours were defined rather than the elastic hours of a teacher's life, and Ellison Sound was a music company, which meant that the work happened in a building where music was taken seriously, even if his specific relationship too. Music was, at the moment, a door he could not open. He had expected Margot Ellison to be a type he recognized. He had been in music-adjacent spaces for years. He had met the executives, the ones who had taste and knew it, who wore that knowledge as an authority others had to negotiate with. He had met the ones who had no taste and compensated with confidence and the organizational power that went with their positions. He had met the ones who were simply going through the motions of an industry they had chosen for reasons that had nothing to do with the music. He had not expected Margot Ellison. She had interviewed him personally. Facilities coordinator was below the level that usually warranted a CEO interview, but Ellison Sound was not a large company, and Margot was known for interviewing everyone who would be regularly in the building. Because the building was where the music was, and she had specific feelings about the people who inhabited the space where music lived. She had asked him 4 questions: what his background was, what he understood about the acoustic requirements of a working music publishing building, what his approach to building system maintenance was, and what kind of music he listened to. The 4th question had surprised him. He had said, mostly older Nashville, some jazz, some West African pop, because Anya. Because my wife had grown up in Senegal, and the music was hers first and became mine. He had not meant to say that. He had said it because the question had caught him without a prepared answer, and the prepared answer was always slower to arrive than the true one. Margot Ellison had looked at him with the quality of attention he would come to understand as her specific superpower. Complete, present, undistracted, the listening of someone who had spent 30 years training herself to hear what was true in a piece of music and who applied that same training to conversations with people. She had said, "You said Anya." Past tense. He had said yes. She had said, "I'm sorry." And then she had offered him the job. He took it. The first weeks at Ellison Sound were an education in a specific kind of building. He had been in school buildings for 6 years and had understood them the way a resident understood their city, through use rather than analysis. He had known which hallways were loud and which were quiet, and what the acoustic tile in the music room did differently from the acoustic tile in the gym. And he had known these things the way you knew the furniture in your own home, without examining them, without needing to. They were the conditions of the work. Ellison Sound was different, because the building was not the condition of the work. The building was the work. Everything in it had been chosen for its relationship to music, the layout of the studios, the isolation of the archive, the acoustic panels in the corridors that were different from the panels in the offices, the specific way the HVAC had been baffled to prevent the mechanical noise from entering the recording spaces. Someone had thought about all of it. Someone had understood that a building where music was made and preserved needed to be designed from the inside out, from the sound outward. He learned, in the second week, that the someone was Margot. She had bought the building 17 years ago, when it was a former print shop on Music Row, and had overseen its renovation with the specific attention of someone who was not just creating a place to work, but creating the right place for the work. He found this out from the building's maintenance logs, which were meticulously kept and which referenced her decisions repeatedly, not as approvals, as contributions. She had known what she wanted in each space. She had specified it. She had been present for the construction in ways that building owners rarely were. He thought, she built this building the way she runs the catalog, with the full understanding of what the thing is for and what it requires. He also learned in the second week why the previous facilities director had been there for 9 years. The building rewarded attention. It was a building that had been designed by someone who cared about it, and it responded to care with the specific generosity of a thing built well. The systems worked. The layout was logical. The problems when they arose were understandable problems with accessible solutions rather than the cryptic failures of a building built carelessly. He found himself looking forward to the workday in a way he had not expected. He found himself arriving early. He had been there 6 weeks when she pulled over in the rain. The rain had not been in the forecast, or it had been and he had forgotten to check, which had been happening more since Anya died, the small organizational failures of a person managing a large reorganization, the things that slipped through. He had checked Cora into Mrs. Nguyen's for the overnight, because Tuesday nights he had a late meeting with the building's FAC contractor. And the late meeting had run longer than planned, and he had come out into the night to find the drizzle of the early evening had become actual rain. He had stood at the bus stop on Division Street and thought, "This is fine. I have stood in worse rain." He had thought, "Cora is warm and dry at Mrs. Nguyen's." He had thought, "The bus comes in 11 minutes." He had been thinking those thoughts, in the specific sequence of a person managing their own response to something inconvenient, when the van stopped. The Ellison Sound van was accessible, modified, with a ramp and hand controls, the specific vehicle of someone who moved through the world in a wheelchair and had made the accommodations necessary to move through it efficiently. He recognized it, and then he recognized the window coming down, and Margot Ellison's face looking at him through the rain. "Joel," she said. "Get in." He had gotten in. The van was warm. He was wet. Margot was looking at him with the practical attention of someone assessing a situation and determining the response, which was the same quality her listening had when she applied it to music. "Where do you live?" she said. "Berry Hill," he said. "You don't need to. Berry Hill is 8 minutes from here," she said. "Get comfortable." He got as comfortable as a wet man in a dry van could get. The driver, she had introduced him as Marcus, a name Joel noted without comment, navigated the Nashville streets with the ease of someone who had been doing this for a long time and knew the route and the vehicle with equal intimacy. Margot was in the passenger section behind the driver, her wheelchair locked in place at the mounting points, facing forward. Joel was in the rear, facing seat across from her, which put them in a mild face-to-face arrangement that was slightly more direct than he was used to in professional contacts. He was aware that he was in a CEO's vehicle. He was aware of the wet jacket and the bus he had not caught, and the 40 minutes he had been standing in the rain thinking that this was fine. He had been in worse rain. He was aware of Cora at Mrs. Nguyen's, warm and asleep by now, and of the house in Berry Hill with the lamp Mrs. Nguyen's daughter had agreed to leave on. He was aware that he was with someone who had made a specific choice. She had not needed to pull over. She had seen him and pulled over because she was a person who, when she could do the right thing and could see it clearly, did it. That was a specific quality. He had met people who had that quality, and he could recognize it, because he had grown up around it, his mother had had it, his grandmother had had it, and Anya had had it completely. The specific absence of the calculation about cost. You saw the thing, you did the thing. He thought, she is that kind of person. He thought, I have not been around that kind of person since Anya died. Not because the people in his life were unkind, because the people in his life were careful around him in the way people were careful around the bereaved, which meant they calculated before they did anything, which meant even their kindness had a quality of management. He understood why. He was even grateful for it. But it was different from the uncalculated kind, the kind that just reached across, because the reaching was the right thing. He got as comfortable as a wet man in a dry van could get. They drove in the specific silence of two people who did not yet have the vocabulary for each other. He was wet and warm and aware of both. She was looking ahead, the way she looked at recordings, not at the thing directly, but in the direction of it, taking it in peripherally. He looked at the van's interior. It was organized with the specificity of a person who had been using a wheelchair for 7 years and had developed, over that time, a precise understanding of what their environment needed to be. Everything within reach that needed to be within reach. The music player on a mount at the right height. The navigation screen angled correctly. The bag behind the seat arranged in a specific way that he could see, even in the dim light, was not random. The discipline of environment as extension of self. He thought, she manages her world with the same precision she manages the catalog, the same attention to what the thing requires versus what is convenient. He thought about Anya, who had been a physical therapist and who had spoken often about the relationship between environment and capacity, about how the right space enabled what the wrong space prevented, about how much of disability was actually a failure of design rather than a limitation of the person. He thought Anya would have found Margot Ellison interesting in that specific way. He thought about Anya and stopped thinking about Anya, the way he often did. The thought arriving and being gently filed, not suppressed, but not dwelt in. Because dwelling was not the same as carrying, and he had learned the difference. They drove in the specific silence of two people who did not yet have the vocabulary for each other. He was aware of the rain on the windows, of the Nashville streets at midnight, of the warmth, of the composition notebook in his bag pressing against his side the way it always pressed. Present. Waited. There. He was aware of the rain on the windows, of the Nashville streets at midnight, of the warmth, of the composition notebook in his bag pressing against his side the way it always pressed. Present. Waited. There. How are you finding the job? She said after a while. Good, he said. The building systems are well maintained. The previous director did good work. He did, she said. He was here for 9 years. I miss him. He understood that a building where people make music needs to be thought of as an instrument. She paused. Do you understand that? He thought about it. He thought about the acoustic panels in the studio hallways, the vac baffles he had spent his third week tracing and understanding, the way the building systems had been designed not just for function, but for the specific function of a place where sound was made and heard. I think so, he said. A building that makes music possible has to be as honest as the music. The systems have to work so well you don't hear them. She looked at him. He could not see the expression fully. The van's interior light was dim, and he was looking straight ahead. But he heard something in the pause. Yes, she said. That's exactly right. They pulled up to his house in Berry Hill. Small, brick, a lamp on in the front window that misses. Wynn's daughter had agreed to leave on so the house wouldn't look empty. He looked at it for a moment, at the lamp, at the rain on the roof, at the small bicycle Cora had left on the porch that he kept meaning to move. "Thank you," he said. "The bus runs until 11, she said. "After that, call a car. Put it on the company account. I'll tell accounting to set it up." He looked at her. "That's not. It's 11:50, she said. "The bus you were waiting for doesn't run after 11 on weekdays." He hadn't known that. He felt, briefly, like an idiot. "Thank you," he said again. "Good night, Joel," she said. He got out of the van. He stood in the rain for a moment watching it drive away. Then he went inside and took off his wet jacket and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the lamp that Mrs. Nguyen's daughter had left on. And he thought about Margot Ellison saying a building where people make music needs to be thought of as an instrument. And he thought about the small composition notebook in his bag. And he thought about the last 2 blank bars. And he thought about Anya. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then he went to bed. The weeks after the van ride had a different quality than the weeks before it. He learned things about Margot Ellison in those weeks that he had not known. Not because she told him directly. She was not a person who gave biographical information casually. In the way of people who understood that not every context warranted every fact. He learned them the way he learned most things about the building. From the evidence, from the physical record, from what was present. He learned that the wheelchair had been with her for 7 years. From the accident. He learned this from the building itself. From the accessibility modifications that had been made in year 8 of the building's occupancy, which was 7 years ago. The ramp at the entrance, the widened corridors, the accessible bathroom on each floor, the desk height in her office that was different from every other desk height in the building. She had redesigned the building around herself. Not accommodatingly, purposefully, the modifications were not add-ons. They were integrated into the building's design in a way that made the building better for everyone, not just for her. He thought, she rebuilt the building after the accident the way she had built it originally. From the inside, out. From the function outward. He learned that she had been a session musician before she was a publisher. A cellist, specifically, who had played on dozens of Nashville recordings in the 90s before moving to the business side of music. Because the business side was where the decisions were made, and she had specific ideas about what decisions should be made. He found this in the company's About page, which he had not read in the first weeks because the About page was not in his professional scope. He read it in the 6th week because he wanted to understand the building better, and you could not understand a building without understanding the person who had built it. A cellist. He thought about that. He thought about what the cello required, the instrument between your body and the floor, the specific physical commitment of playing it, the way the vibration went into the body directly. He thought, she was not a person who related to music at a distance. She had been in it physically. The accident had changed the physical relationship, but had not changed the relationship to the music. He thought, that is why she can hear what she hears. The music is still in her body. It just doesn't come out the same way it used to. The weeks after the van ride had a different quality than the weeks before it. He could not have said precisely what changed. The job was the same. Building systems, maintenance schedules, the contractor relationships, and the capital project tracking, and the specific physical intimacy of knowing a building's infrastructure from the inside out. Margot's management style had not changed. She was the same precise, demanding, fully present CEO he had encountered in the interview. The same person who asked exactly the right questions and expected exactly the right answers, and had no patience for the kind of professional approximation that passed for competence in most organizations. What changed was that she spoke to him, not only in the formal channels of the facilities management relationship, the work orders and the project approvals, and the weekly building status report he submitted every Friday. She spoke to him in the building, in the corridor near her office, or the archive room, where the physical catalog of master recordings was kept. In the specific, incidental way of 2 people who had been in a warm van together in the rain and had said something true to each other. She asked about Cora once, in passing. Had he gotten the car account set up? He had. Good. And Cora, the school was good? The school was good. Cora liked her teacher. She liked drawing. She had recently decided that her favorite animal was a narwhal, based on criteria she had not fully disclosed. Margot had looked at him with the listening quality. "A narwhal," she said. "She says they are the most interesting because they are proof that something can be real and also impossible," he said. Something moved in Margot's expression. Not the warm expression that people performed when a child said something charming, something more considered than that. "She's 6? 6 last month." "She's correct," Margot said, "about the narwhals." And she went back into her office. He stood in the corridor for a moment after she left. He thought, this is not a CEO who performs interest in the children of her employees. She was actually interested. The distinction was audible to him the way musical quality was audible, not as a technique, but as a condition. The archive room was on the 3rd floor, a climate-controlled space housing decades of master recordings, contracts, session notes, the physical record of Ellison Sound's 30-year catalog. Joel had been responsible for the climate control systems in the room since his first week. The temperature and humidity requirements were strict, and the previous director had left detailed protocols, and he spent an hour in the room every Thursday checking the readings and verifying the storage conditions. It was in the archive room, on the 3rd Thursday, that he hummed. He had not meant to. He had not hummed since Anya died, had not sung, had not played. Had been so completely not musical in those 18 months that his own absence from the territory surprised him sometimes. But he was in the archive room, alone, and the room had an acoustic quality that the rest of the building didn't have. The particular quality of a space that had been designed to hold sound, to hold music, to be a place where music was preserved rather than performed. The room smelled of preservation, the slight mustiness of old paper, the clean dryness of the climate control, the specific faint scent of magnetic tape in the older sections of the archive. He was checking the readings at the northeast corner when a fragment came to him. He had been in the archive room for 35 minutes at that point. The readings were precise. The previous director had set the tolerances carefully, and the system maintained them without much intervention, which meant Joel's 30-minute Thursday visits were mostly verification rather than adjustment. He checked the northeast corner, the southeast corner, the central reading station, and the area around the oldest recordings in the west section, where the magnetic tape required the tightest humidity control. The archive had a quality that he had been trying to name since the first Thursday. It was not just quiet. The whole building was quiet, in the way buildings without street-facing windows were quiet. It was quieter than that. It was the specific quiet of a room that had been designed to hold sound and was currently holding silence. The silence had weight. It had the quality of a held breath. He had thought about this in the context of the school music room in Antioch. That room had a different quality. The quality of a space where sound was made regularly, where the walls had absorbed years of student performances and general music classes, and the occasional genuinely transcendent moment when a 13-year-old who had been resistant to music all year suddenly heard something they recognized in themselves. The archive room had never held that kind of making. It held the products of making, the recordings, the scores, the session notes, the preserved evidence of what had been made somewhere else. It was a library, not a performance space. He had thought this and then thought, but music is in it. The shelves of recordings were music. The catalog was music. The room held music in the specific technical sense that the climate control was preserving magnetic tape and optical discs that contained music. The room was always full of music. It was just music in a form that required a player to become audible. He was checking the readings at the northeast corner when a fragment came to him. Not the unfinished song. Something different. A small melodic phrase, 4 notes, the kind of thing that appeared and usually disappeared before he registered it. He registered it this time. He hummed it, involuntarily, twice, and then he heard the door. Margot had come in. Not unusual. She spent time in the archive regularly, reviewing catalog decisions and source recordings in the specific way of someone who needed to understand her inventory physically, to be in the same room with it. She had come in quietly, the way she moved everywhere quietly, and she was near the door when he became aware of her. He stopped humming. "Don't stop," she said. He was looking at the humidity reading. He did not look up. I wasn't doing anything. Just, Joel? Her voice had the quality it had when she was listening to a recording. Full attention, no judgment. The listening that was also a form of care. Don't stop. He stood at the northeast corner of the archive room with the humidity reading sheet in his hand and the 4-note fragment still in his head. And he thought about Anya. About the Sunday evenings and the notebook she kept in the drawer. About the last 2 bars, blank. He did not hum again. But he looked at Margot, across the archive room, and she was looking at him with the specific expression of someone who has heard something true in a piece of music and is deciding what to do with having heard it. You were a music teacher, she said. Not a question. She had read his file, had known since the interview. Yes, do you write? He thought about the composition notebook in his bag. I used to, he said. She looked at him for the long moment. The archive room was quiet around them, the specific quiet of a room designed to preserve sound, holding this particular silence with the same care it gave everything else. Come find me when you're ready to talk about it, she said. She went to the catalog section she'd come for. He finished the humidity readings. They were both in the room for another 20 minutes without speaking, and the 20 minutes had the particular quality of a silence that is not empty. He thought about it on the drive home. About the 4 notes. About the fact that they had come. He had thought, for the last 18 months, that the music was gone. Not gone in the way of a skill you lose from disuse, he knew, intellectually. That the musical perception didn't work that way. You didn't lose the ear. You lost the impulse, the inclination, the whatever it was that connected the hearing to the making. He had lost that. He had been living in a world where he heard music constantly. In the car, in the building, in the city, in Cora's off-key singing in the bathtub, and felt nothing beyond the hearing. The music was there, and it was not his. He moved through it the way you moved through weather, present in it, not participating. 4 notes in the archive room had been different. He thought about why. He thought about the room itself, the climate control, the preservation quality, the specific smell of it. He thought about what Cora had said, it's quiet in a different way, like it's holding something. He thought, the room holds music with care. He thought, I have not been in a room that held music with care in 18 months. He thought, maybe that's what was missing. Not the capacity, the room. He picked up Cora from school. She told him about the narwhal she had drawn in art class, which was, she said, anatomically correct in ways the teacher had not expected. He told her he believed her. They made dinner together, she mixed and he cooked, and the kitchen had the specific noise of 2 people whose domestic choreography was still being learned but was getting easier. She went to bed at 8. He sat at the kitchen table. He did not take out the composition notebook. He thought about the 4 notes. He wrote them down on a piece of paper from the junk drawer, not in the notebook, on a piece of paper, the way you write something you might throw away, and he looked at them. 4 notes. A beginning. He thought about Margot saying, don't stop. He thought about the quality of that instruction, not a request, not a professional directive, something in between. Something in the register of the van in the rain, a person doing the right thing because they could see it clearly. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket and went to bed. About the way they had come without warning, the way they used to come before. The ambient musical perception of a person for whom music was a native language, not a learned one. He had thought that capacity was gone. He had assumed, in the way of someone who has lost the impulse to do a thing for a sustained period, that the impulse was gone too. It was not gone. It had been somewhere he couldn't reach it, and the archive room, the climate-controlled room that smelled of preservation, that held 30 years of other people's music with such care, had briefly opened the door. He picked up Cora from school. She told him about the narwhal she had drawn in art class, which was, she said, anatomically correct in ways the teacher had not expected. He told her he believed her. They made dinner together, which was their ritual. She mixed, and he cooked. And the kitchen had the specific noise of 2 people whose domestic choreography was still being learned, but was getting easier. She went to bed at 8. He sat at the kitchen table. He did not take out the composition notebook. He thought about the 4 notes. He wrote them down on a piece of paper from the junk drawer, Not in the notebook, on a piece of paper, the way you write something you might throw away. And he looked at them. 4 notes. A beginning. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket and went to bed. Reed Calloway had been the head of A&R at Ellison Sound for 4 years. He was charming in the specific way of music industry people who had decided that charm was the relevant professional competency. Warm, enthusiastic, full of the language of artistic enthusiasm that passed for vision in A&R, and that occasionally was vision but more often was the performance of vision, because the performance was close enough to pass. He had signed 3 significant artists in his 4 years. He had also let 7 significant artists go to competitors, each time with a coherent professional rationale that had not, in the year or 2 following each decision, held up particularly well against the outcomes. Joel noticed Reed Calloway the way he had noticed things in the building since the first week, through the physical evidence of a person's occupancy. He had been learning the building's human ecology since the first day. Every building had one, the specific way that the people who occupied it arranged themselves in relation to each other and to the space. The archive room on Thursday was Margot's because she was always there Thursday afternoon. The second studio at 9 in the morning was the early arrivals. The A&R suite on the second floor had the specific arrangement of someone who used it for visibility as much as for work. The conference room staging that said, "I am a person who receives important people here." Joel had seen the same quality in a hotel room prepared for inspection. Not the quality of someone living in a space, the quality of someone managing how it appeared. He filed this and began assigning meaning in the second month, when the Schvack upgrade put him adjacent to the conference rooms. The A&R suite on the second floor had a specific quality after Reed's presence. The particular arrangement of things left in ways that suggested performance rather than work. The conference room set up for visits that were visible from the lobby. The kind of staging that said, "I am a person who receives important people here." Joel had seen the same quality in a hotel room once, prepared for inspection. Not the quality of someone living in a space, the quality of someone managing how a space appeared. He did not assign meaning to this immediately. He filed it. He began assigning meaning in the second month, when he started overhearing conversations. The building's VAC upgrade required him to spend significant time in the mechanical rooms adjacent to the main conference spaces. The conference rooms were not soundproofed against the mechanical rooms, an oversight in the original build that was on the capital projects list to address. He was not listening. He was doing his job. What he heard, accumulated over 3 weeks of FAC work adjacent to 3 conference room walls, was a pattern. Reed Calloway was meeting with people Joel did not recognize from the building's regular visitors. Not artists. The building had a specific frequency of artist visits that Joel had learned to recognize from the quality of the building's energy on those days, the particular alertness of the staff, the way Margot moved through the building differently when there was a creative session happening. These were different meetings. Quieter, the tone of the conversations that carried through the wall was the tone of business conversations, not creative ones. The specific register of people talking about deals and money and positioning. He heard a name he recognized, Parallel Records. A mid-sized competitor label with distribution deals across 3 major markets. He heard it mentioned in the context of a specific artist's name that he recognized as someone Ellison Sound had been expected to sign in the fall. He heard that artist's name mentioned in the same sentence as a number that was clearly a deal figure. He put the information together. He thought, Reed Calloway is routing signing opportunities to a side arrangement he has with Parallel Records. He is doing it in Ellison Sound's building, in Ellison Sound's conference rooms, while Ellison Sound is losing the deals he is routing away from it. He thought, this is not a small thing. He thought, I need to tell Margot. He spent a week thinking about how to tell her. He was again in the position of being a person with information that needed to reach the right person through a channel he wasn't sure how to use. He was the facilities coordinator. She was the CEO. Their professional relationship was defined. Their personal relationship, the van, the archive room, the narwhal conversation, was warmer than the professional relationship, but was also only 3 months old. He knocked on her office door on a Friday afternoon. She was at her desk with headphones on, listening to a recording. She did this most afternoons, An hour of listening that was part of how she managed the catalog and assessed new material. She took the headphones off. "Joel, I need to tell you something," he said. "Can I close the door?" She looked at him. The listening quality. Close the door. He closed it. He sat down. He told her what he had heard, precisely, the way you described a building problem. The symptoms, the location, the pattern, the conclusion. He did not editorialize. He told her the artist's name, the deal figure he had overheard, the parallel records name, the frequency of the meetings. She was still while he talked. The complete stillness that was her processing mode, not the stillness of someone who had gone somewhere else, but the stillness of someone who was entirely here, integrating everything he was saying. When he finished, she said, "How long?" "The meetings I've seen started about 6 weeks ago," he said. "I don't know when the arrangement started." "Reed has been here 4 years," she said. "I know. 3 artists I expected to sign in the past year went to other labels," she said. "I attributed it to competitive market dynamics." "Yes," he said. "And now I'm going to attribute it to something else," she said. It was not a question. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at the window. Not at anything specific outside it, at the middle distance that was where her thinking happened. "You're not the person who should be apologizing," she said. He waited. She looked at him for a long time after he finished. Not the processing silence, she was past that. She was in the other silence, the one where the processing was complete, and the decision was being made. He had been prepared for her not to believe him. He had thought about this on the drive-in. He was the facilities coordinator. He had been in the building for 3 months, and he was telling the CEO that her head of A&R was running a side arrangement with the competitor. The information had come to him through an effect mechanical room wall. It was a reasonable thing not to believe. She believed him without any visible gap of doubt. He thought about why afterward he thought, she is a person who has spent 30 years training herself to hear what is true in a piece of music. True versus performed. She applied that training to everything. She had applied it in the van, when he'd said Anya without meaning to, and she had heard the truth of it and responded to it. She applied it in the archive room when he hummed 4 notes and she said, "Don't stop." She applied it now. He thought, she believed me because I was telling the truth and she could hear it. She said, "I need to know how long." He told her 6 weeks of meetings he'd observed. She said 3 artists in a year. She said, "I attributed it to competitive dynamics." He said, "I'm sorry." She looked at the window with the expression of someone doing a specific calculation, not the emotional calculation, the strategic one. He had seen this expression before, on the face of a principal deciding how to address a situation that was large enough to require care, but small enough that a clumsy response would do more damage than the situation itself. "I need 2 weeks," she said. "I need to get ahead of this properly before I address it formally. There are people I need to talk to at the board level who have the right context." She paused. "In the meantime, I need the building to look exactly like the building. Nothing changes in how things appear." "Understood," he said. "And I need you." She stopped. She looked at him with the listening quality. "I need you to know that what you just did cost you something. The risk of telling me. I know what that risk is for someone in your position in this building." "It was the right thing," he said. "Yes," she said. "It was." She looked at the window again. "Did you know Reed before you came here?" "No. Would you know him in a lineup?" "I think so," Joel said. "He has very specific conference room staging habits. It's hard to miss once you've seen it." She looked at him, the not-quite smile that was her version of one. "Yes," she said. "He does." She picked up the headphones. "Go back to work, Joel. I'll handle this." He went back to work. He drove home that evening thinking about Anya, about the surgery that was supposed to be simple, about the complication that happened in the 1 in several thousand category that was almost never, about the specific grief of losing someone to a thing that could have been caught if someone had looked at the right information at the right time, the misread in the post-op monitoring, the symptom that was attributed to the anesthesia wearing off and was something else entirely, the window in which the intervention was possible, which had closed before anyone had looked. He was not angry about it the way he had been in the first months. The first months had been anger like he had never known. The specific anger of a man who had spent his professional life in a building where people made music, where the attention to detail was absolute, where a wrong note was caught and corrected, and who had lost his wife to a wrong note in a clinical system that was supposed to be more careful than his middle school students. That anger had been very hot and had burned down over 18 months to something cooler and more specific. Not anger at anyone in particular, but at the gap between what was possible and what had happened. The gap that always existed between a thing being possible and it being done. Information that reached the right person in time could close that gap. He had learned this from Anya's death, and he had acted on it with Reed Calloway. And the information had arrived in time, and Margot would close the gap. He thought, that is what I can do. I can see the thing clearly, and I can bring it to the person who can act on it. That is the contribution. That is the form of it. He picked up Cora from Mrs. Nguyen's. Cora had drawn another narwhal. This one had wings. He asked whether narwhals had wings. She said, mine does. He said, fair enough. She said, the wings help it get to places it couldn't get to otherwise. He looked at the drawing for a moment. He said, that makes sense. He made dinner. He put her to bed. He sat at the kitchen table. He took the piece of paper out of his pocket. The 4 notes, still there, still folded. He looked at them for a long moment. He opened his bag and took out the composition notebook. He held it for a moment, the specific weight of it, the blue cover worn at the corners, the specific weight of 18 months of carrying it without opening it. He did not open it. He set it on the table beside the piece of paper. 2 things on the table, the old unfinished one and the beginning of something new. He sat with that for a long time. He thought, they belong together. He did not know yet what he meant by that. He thought, but they do. He put both things away and went to bed. He had not opened the notebook, but he had taken it out. He had taken it out and set it next to the 4 notes and held them both in his attention simultaneously, the old thing and the new beginning. And that was different from the 3 times he had tried to open it and finished. That had been trying. This was something else. This was letting the 2 things be near each other. He thought Anya would have understood the distinction. She was a physical therapist. She knew the difference between forcing a joint to move and creating the conditions in which movement became possible. He drove to the building in the morning. He checked the archive readings. He did his job. He was good at his job. Margot passed him in the corridor at noon and said, in the passing way, the HVAC contractor wants to move the February inspection to the first week of March. Does that work for your schedule? He said yes. She moved on. He kept walking. He thought, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like to be in the right place. About the surgery, the minor thing, the routine procedure, the complication that no one had expected because it was the kind of complication that didn't happen, statistically, and then happened. He thought about information that arrived too late, and information that arrived in time and the difference between them. He thought, this arrived in time. That's something. He thought about Margot sitting at her desk with the headphones and the recording she had been listening to when he came in. About the 30 years of music she had been entrusted with. About the specific responsibility of being the person who understood the value of something well enough to protect it. He thought, she will protect it. That is what she does. He picked up Cora from Mrs. Nguyen's. Cora had drawn another narwhal. This one had wings. He asked whether narwhals had wings. She said, mine does. He said, fair enough. He made dinner. He put her to bed. He sat at the kitchen table. He took the piece of paper out of his pocket. The 4 notes, still there, still folded. He looked at them for a long moment. He opened his bag and took out the composition notebook. He held it for a moment, the specific weight of it, the blue cover worn at the corners. He did not open it. He set it on the table beside the piece of paper. 2 things on the table. The old, unfinished one, and the beginning of something new. He sat with that for a long time. Then he put both things away and went to bed. Cora came to Ellison Sound on a Saturday in March. The Saturday was Joel's in the sense of his work schedule. There was a climate system maintenance window that the building's regular operating hours made difficult, and the HVAC contractor needed him on site. He had brought Cora before to job sites, She was competent in the specific way of children who had spent time in working environments and who understood that you were invisible or you left. She installed herself in Joel's office with her colored pencils and her current narwhal and related creatures drawing project, and she was, for 2 hours, perfectly invisible. He checked on her at 30-minute intervals, not because she needed checking on, but because he was her father, and he was 3 floors away, and the interval felt right. Each time he came back, she was in the same position, drawing pad open, pencils arranged in the specific order she maintained, the narwhal in various states of completion across the sheet she had filled. She had the focused contentment of someone doing exactly what they wanted to be doing in a space that was serving its purpose. He thought, she is her mother's daughter. Anya had that quality in the clinical work, the focused contentment of someone entirely present to the task. Cora had inherited it. Not the task itself, but the quality of the presence, the specific completeness of attention. He thought, I miss Anya in the mornings most. In the evenings I am tired enough that the missing is a background thing. In the mornings, before Cora wakes up, the missing is the specific weight of a person who should be there and isn't. He had learned to move through the morning weight. He had not learned to make it lighter. He had learned that lighter was not the goal, and that you carried the weight with care, the way you carried anything that mattered. He finished the maintenance window at noon and came back to the office to find Cora gone. At noon, the maintenance window was complete, and Joel came back to his office to collect Cora for lunch and found the office empty. He found her in the archive room. She had not broken in. The door had been left ajar from his earlier access. A failure of protocol, he noted with the self-reproach of a facilities person who knew better. She was sitting on the floor in the middle of the archive room with a colored pencil in her hand and her drawing pad in her lap, and she was looking up at the shelves of the archive with the expression of someone who had walked into a library and understood, immediately, that the library contained something important. Cora, he said. This room sounds different, she said. He looked at her. How do you mean? It's quiet in a different way, she said, like it's holding something. He stood in the doorway of the archive room and looked at his daughter on the floor of it. He thought about what she had said. He thought about the acoustic quality of the room, the specific quality of preservation, of climate control designed for the permanence of recorded sound. He thought, she heard it correctly. She walked in here and she heard it correctly. That's what it does, he said. It holds music. Is that why you hum in here? She said. He looked at her. I heard you once, she said. On the phone when you were working late. I heard the background. He had not known she had heard. He stood in the doorway and thought about the 4 notes in the archive room, and the piece of paper in his pocket, and the composition notebook in his bag, and the last 2 blank bars that had been blank for 18 months. He said, yes, that's why. Cora nodded. She went back to her drawing. He went to check that she hadn't disturbed anything in the archive. She had not disturbed anything. She had not touched the recordings. She had not moved the catalog materials. She had, apparently, come in, sat on the floor and found the reading desk, and seen the composition notebook, and opened it with the careful hands of a child who had been taught that other people's things required care. He picked it up. He looked at the narwhal in the margin. Cora's blue pencil, the pale blue she used for the horns, the specific color, she said, was right for something that felt the world. The narwhal was small, drawn with the focused specificity she brought to things that mattered. The horn curved correctly. The eye had the expressiveness she had been adding lately. He thought about Anya's notebook in the kitchen drawer. He thought about the archive room and the climate control that kept things from decaying, that held things in the specific care of a space designed for permanence. He thought, Cora drew something true into the margin of the last song Anya heard. She drew something real and also impossible. He sat down at the desk. She had not disturbed anything, but the composition notebook, which he had taken from his bag earlier to make room for the maintenance documentation, was on the reading desk at the south end of the room where he had set it without thinking. It was closed. It was where he had left it. Cora had opened it. He could see from where he stood that the pages were spread. He crossed the room. He looked down. She had not read it, not in any way that was legible to her. The notation was beyond her. But she had opened to the last page, the one with the unfinished song, and she had drawn something in the margin. A narwhal, small in the pale blue pencil she used for the horn. A narwhal in the margin of the last page of the last song Anya had heard him work on. He stood at the desk looking at it. He thought about Anya's notebook in the kitchen drawer, her handwriting, his melodies and her imprecise loving notation. He thought about the archive room and the climate control that kept things from decaying, that held things in the specific care of a space designed for preservation. He thought, she drew a narwhal on it. Something real and also impossible. He sat down at the desk. He picked up the pencil, not Cora's blue pencil, the drafting pencil he used for facility notes, which was in his breast pocket. He opened the notebook to the last page. He looked at the last 2 blank bars. He wrote. He did not know where it came from. He did not examine it as it came, because the examination was the thing that had stopped it before. The overattention that was also a form of anxiety. He just wrote. 4 notes first. The fragment from the archive room. Then more. The blank bars filling in the way a thing fills in when it was always going to be that shape, and only needed the moment to arrive. He wrote for 11 minutes. When he stopped, the song was finished. He sat at the desk in the archive room with the composition notebook open in front of him and the completed song on the last page and the narwhal in the margin in Cora's blue pencil. He sat for a long time. He was not crying. He was not anything specific. He was just there, in the room that held music with the finished thing in his hands. Cora came around the corner of the archive shelves. She looked at him and she looked at the notebook. She was 6, and she understood that something had happened that she should not comment on directly. She sat down next to him on the archive room bench and put her hand on his arm and looked at the ceiling. He put his hand over hers. They sat there together. Margot found them there. She had come to the building for the same reason she often came on Saturdays. The building was quieter, and she could think better in it when it was not populated with the specific energy of the working week. She came to the archive room because she often did, and she stopped in the doorway at the sight of the facilities coordinator and his 6-year-old daughter sitting together in the archive room with a notebook open on the desk and the particular quality of stillness around them that meant something had recently happened. She did not interrupt. She stood in the doorway. After a moment she said, "Quietly, Joel." He looked up. She looked at the notebook. He looked at the notebook. He understood, from the look she gave it, that she had understood what the notebook was, not the specific content, but the category of it, the thing he had been carrying. "May I?" she said. He looked at Cora. Cora looked at the notebook. She gave the small nod that was her version of, "This seems right." He turned the notebook around on the desk so Margot could see it from the doorway. She read the last page. She could read music, she was a music publisher, and she had trained herself, over 30 years, to read a score the way other people read text. She read it in the specific, complete way of someone for whom the notation was sound, not symbols. She was still for a long time. "This is hers," she said. "The melody. You've been writing toward this." "I think so," he said. "It's finished," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at the narwhal in the margin, something in her face that he could not read from across the room, not the professional expression, not the listening expression, something past those, something that was just the human expression of being in the presence of something true. "Ellison Roots," she said. He looked at her. "It's the name I've been building toward," she said. "An artist development arm for underserved songwriters. I have the concept. I don't have the operations director." She paused. "You were a music teacher for 6 years. You understand what it means to work with someone who has the thing but not the form for it. You understand the building. You understand the catalog." She looked at the notebook. "You understand what music costs." He thought about Anya, about Cora's hand on his arm, about the narwhal in the margin. "Tell me about the concept," he said. She told him. It was 4 in the afternoon. Outside the archive room's one small window, the Nashville light, was the specific March gold that came before the spring, and the building was quiet around them, and Cora had fallen asleep on the archive room bench with her drawing pad on her chest, and Margot Ellison described Ellison Roots in the particular way she described things she believed in, without performance. Without the rhetoric of pitch, just the thing itself, clear and specific and real. She told him about the songwriters she had been watching for 2 years. Not the ones with labels, not the ones with management, not the ones who had been to Belmont or Berkeley and had the credential and the network. The ones who were writing because they couldn't not write, who were playing in small rooms and putting tracks online, and existing in the space between being invisible and being found. She had been watching them because she believed that the catalog, the real catalog, the 30-year one, the songs that would still be licensed in 30 more years, came from that space. It came from the person who was writing, because they couldn't not write. Not because they had a deal or a career plan, but because the music was a fact about them that wouldn't stop being true. What Ellison Roots does, she said, is give them the building, the space, the development structure. Not a signing, not a management deal. The specific thing they need that no one else is providing. A room where the music is taken seriously while it's still in the process of becoming what it's going to be. He looked at Cora asleep on the bench with her drawing pad. He thought about Antioch, about the 7th grader who heard something they recognized in themselves, about the specific patience required to be present for that moment, without forcing it, without managing it, without doing anything except creating the conditions in which it could happen. You need a teacher, he said, not a producer, not an A&R person. She looked at him. Yes, she said. Exactly, a teacher who understands the building, he said. She was quiet for a moment. And who has been in the archive, she said. He thought about the 4 notes, about the blank bars filling in, about sitting at the desk in the archive room with the narwhal in the margin and the finished thing in his hands. He thought, she is right. The archive is part of it. You cannot teach someone what music costs if you don't know what it costs. You cannot teach someone to protect the work if you have not protected something yourself. Tell me about the concept, he said. She told him. It was 4 p.m. Outside the archive room's one small window, the Nashville light, was the specific March gold that came before the spring, and the building was quiet around them. And Cora had fallen asleep on the archive room bench, with her drawing pad on her chest, and Margot Ellison described Ellison Roots in the particular way she described things she believed in, without performance, without the rhetoric of pitch, just the thing itself, clear and specific and real. He listened. At the end, he said, "What does the operations director need to do on day 1? She told him that too. The board meeting in which Ellison Roots was approved happened on a Tuesday in April. Joel had spent the 2 weeks between the archive room Saturday and the board meeting doing the work that needed doing, the operational framework for Ellison Roots, the physical space plan, the artist outreach structure. He had done it at the kitchen table after Cora went to bed, and during the building's working day and the margins of the facilities work that was still his primary responsibility. He had the music teacher's specific skill for working on 2 things simultaneously. Without either suffering, it was what teaching general music required. The management of the lesson plan and the management of 22 children who had their own simultaneous agenda, and you learn to hold both without dropping either. He had submitted the framework to Margot on a Monday morning. She had read it the same day and sent back 3 questions, then we present Thursday. He had answered the 3 questions. She had said, we present Thursday. They had presented Thursday. He had been in the room, the board had asked for the operations director to be present, which was him, and he had answered 5 questions from board members who wanted to understand the infrastructure, and 1 question from a board member named Alice, who wanted to know how you knew when a songwriter was ready. He had thought about his Antioch students. He had said, you know when they stop performing the music and start playing it. She had looked at him with the expression of someone who had just received the answer they were looking for. She had nodded. The vote had been unanimous. The board meeting in which Ellison Roots was approved happened on a Tuesday in April. Margot had spent the 2 weeks between the Friday afternoon conversation with Joel and the board meeting with the precision of someone who understood that a good idea needed a good structure to be approved and that the structure needed to arrive first. She had presented the financials to 2 board members individually before the full meeting, not lobbying. The version of briefing that was genuinely about ensuring they had context. She had the financial model for Ellison Roots ready at a level of specificity that answered the obvious questions before they were asked. What she had also done, in those 2 weeks, was address Reed Calloway. Joel did not know the details of how that conversation went. He knew that Reed left the company at the end of the 2-week period with a separation agreement and a specific category of exit that was described publicly as a strategic restructuring of the A&R function. He knew that the 2 board members Margot had briefed had received enough context to understand what the restructuring actually was. He knew that the 3 artists he had overheard in the conference room conversations, 2 of whom had not yet finalized their deals elsewhere, were now in active conversation with Ellison Sound's new A&R team. He knew this because Margot told him, in the brief corridor conversations that were the texture of their working relationship, not the full story, the shape of it, enough to know that the information he had brought her had arrived in time. The board meeting was on a Tuesday. Joel was not in the board meeting. There was no reason for the operations director of a not-yet-launched subsidiary to be in the approval meeting. He was in his office when Margot's assistant appeared in the doorway at 3:15 and said, "She wants you in the conference room." He went to the conference room. Margot was at the table with the 3 board members who had voted. He understood from their posture that the vote had just happened, that the specific decompression of a room that has completed a difficult thing was in the air. She looked at him across the table. "It passed," she said. He sat down. "By how much?" "Unanimously," she said. He looked at the table. He thought about Anya, about what she would have said. She would have said the practical thing, asked what happened next, moved directly to the operational questions because she was a physical therapist, and the body of anything was always the first consideration. He thought she would have been proud of him and would not have said so directly, and he would have known anyway. "What happens next?" he said. Margot told him. The Ellison Roots launch was 6 months away. The operational work between now and then was his, the artist outreach structure, the development program framework, the space in the building that needed to be repurposed for the work. It was large and specific, and he understood it in both its dimensions simultaneously, the music part and the building part, which was the specific qualification he had brought without knowing he was bringing it. He worked on it every day for 6 months. The first Ellison Roots artist arrived in May. Her name was Priscilla, and she was 28, and she had been writing country-adjacent folk music in Nashville for 4 years, from a 1-bedroom apartment in Inglewood, with a second-hand guitar and a voice that Joel recognized from the first session as the specific thing that could not be taught. The sound of a person who was not performing vulnerability, but experiencing it, whose music came from the place where the personal and the universal overlapped. She was also the worst sight reader he had ever worked with. She could not read the chart. She could not stay in a defined key. She played by ear with an accuracy that was remarkable, and a technical vocabulary that was nearly empty. She was, in the standard industry framing, not ready. Joel worked with her on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons in the second studio. He did not teach her to read music. That was not what she needed first. He taught her to trust what she was hearing inside herself before she tried to put it down in a form someone else could read. He taught her the architecture of a song, not the theory, the experience of it, where the tension goes, where it resolves, why the bridge feels like a bridge. Margot came to the studio doorway on the 3rd session and listened for 20 minutes. She did not say anything. She left. After the session, she sent Joel a message. That's what it's supposed to look like. He read the message at the kitchen table that evening. Cora asleep upstairs. The composition notebook open in front of him for the first time since the archive room. Not with the goal of writing, just open, keeping him company. He worked on it every day for 6 months. The launch event for Ellison Roots was in October, in the main studio at Ellison Sound. 40 people in the room, the board, the staff, the first 6 artists who had enrolled in the development program, several music journalists who had been tracking the initiative with interest, and, because Joel had asked and Margot had agreed, Mrs. Nguyen, who had been Cora's backup parent for 18 months and who deserved to see what the job she had made possible had become. Cora was there. She wore the blue dress she saved for important occasions, and she stood next to her father with the composure of someone attending an event of this significance regularly. She had her drawing pad. During the opening remarks she drew, quietly in the corner, a narwhal Joel could see from the corner of his eye. This one with the specific details she had been adding lately. The detail that Margot had mentioned once, the horn is a sensory organ, she had said. Narwhals use it to feel the world. Cora had been drawing narwhals with expressive, feeling horns ever since. At the end of the program, Margot played a recording. Joel had not known she would do this. The recording was short, 2 minutes, a piano arrangement of the song from the composition notebook, which she had taken after the archive room Saturday with his permission and had arranged by a composer on their new artist roster. The arrangement was simple. It was right. The last 2 bars, the ones he had written in the archive room with Cora's narwhal in the margin, arrived at the end in the way that right endings arrive, inevitably, as if they had always been there. He had not known she would do this. The recording was short, 2 minutes, a piano arrangement of the song from the composition notebook, arranged by a composer on their new artist roster, a young woman named Tess, who had been writing in Nashville for 3 years before Ellison Roots found her. He had not known Tess had been working on this arrangement. He had not known Margot had asked her to. The recording started. He recognized it immediately. The opening 4 notes from the archive room, the melodic phrase he had written in the blank bars, all of it present and intact, and given a form he had not given it himself. Tess had arranged it with the restraint of someone who understood that the song did not need embellishment. The piano carried it plainly, the way Anya had listened to him play on Sunday evenings. Full attention, no additions, just the thing. He did not know he was going to cry until he was. Not visibly, he stood at the edge of the room with Cora beside him, and he was very still, and the recording played, and the last 2 bars arrived, and they were, as Margot had said, finished. The room was quiet for a moment after it ended. Then people moved again, talked again, the specific noise of an event resuming. Joel stood at the edge of the room. Cora was beside him. She had looked up from her drawing when the music started, and she had listened with the same quality her father brought to listening. Fully, completely, the whole thing in. She said after a moment, "That was Mama's song." He looked at her. "It sounded like her," Cora said. It sounded the way she was. He did not know how she knew this. She had been 4 when Anya died. She had not heard the song in any form while Anya was alive. But she said it with the complete confidence of someone reporting a thing they had heard correctly. He put his arm around her. He thought she heard it right. She heard it exactly right. Margot came to them after the room had moved into the reception portion of the evening. She had the quality she had in the archive room that first Saturday, the expression past the professional expression, the one that was just the human one. "How did you know?" he said when she reached them. He meant the recording. He meant the ending. "I listened to it," she said. "That's what I do." He looked at her. He thought about the van in the rain, about the archive room, about the narwhal in the margin, about the specific series of things that had to be exactly as they were for the last 2 bars to get written. "Margot," he said. Yes, he had been going to say thank you, but that was not the right word for it. He thought about what the right word was. "The building worked," he said. She looked at him, the listening quality, then the not-quite smile. "Yes," she said. "The building worked." Cora tugged his hand. "Dad," she said. "Mrs. Nguyen wants to know if the narwhal drawing is for her." He looked at Cora. He looked at Margot. She was looking at Cora with the expression that had been opening in her. Month by month, since a van in the rain on Division Street, a door that had been deciding incrementally to open. "Can I see it?" Margot said to Cora. Cora turned the drawing pad. The narwhal with the expressive horn, the one that felt the world, the one that was real and also impossible. Margot looked at it for a long time. "It's perfect," she said. "This is not a story about a man who was rescued. It is a story about a man who was heard. These are different things. Being rescued implies a helplessness that was waiting to be addressed, a deficit corrected from the outside, a problem solved by the intervention of someone with more resources or power or ability. Joel Baptiste was not helpless. He was a man who had lost the person who listened to him and who had been living, for 18 months, in a world that was full of people who cared about him, but none of whom listened to music the way he heard it. Not in the specific way. Not in the way that reached the place in him where the music lived. Margot Ellison listened to music the way Joel heard it. She had spent 30 years training herself to hear the true thing in a piece of music, the thing under the technique. The human fact behind the craft, the reason the song mattered that was not reducible to its structure or its execution. She heard him in the archive room humming 4 notes, and she said, "Don't stop." She read the last page of the composition notebook, and she said, "This is finished." She played the recording at the Ellison Roots launch, and the last 2 bars arrived inevitably, as if they had always been there. She heard him. Anya had heard him for 9 years. Anya's absence had left him in a world where his music was not heard, and without the hearing it had gone somewhere he couldn't reach it. This was not a failure of his. This was the specific cost of being a person whose interior life required a particular kind of witness, and the witness being gone. Cora heard him too. Cora, who was 6, and who had heard her father's music in the background of a late-night phone call, and who had drawn a narwhal in the margin of the last unfinished song, and whose act of drawing had opened the door. Cora, who said it sounded like her mother, who had heard it right. Reed Calloway's exit from the company was followed, over the next 12 months, by the return of 2 artists he had diverted, and the signing of 4 new artists who had been in development through Ellison Roots. The A&R function was rebuilt. The board expressed confidence in the company's strategic direction in 2 successive quarterly meetings. The Parallel Records side venture was the subject of a trade press report that was not kind to it. Ellison Roots placed its first artist in a sync licensing deal 18 months after launch. A songwriter from East Nashville who had been writing for 12 years without a publishing home, whose music had the quality that Margot described as true. Not necessarily perfect, not necessarily polished, but the thing under the polish that made the polish worth having. The sync deal was for a film score. It was modest. It was a beginning. Joel kept the composition notebook. He did not stop using it. That was the change that the archive room Saturday had made permanent. He wrote again, not every day but regularly, in the way of someone who has recovered access to a room in themselves and who uses it with the care of someone who understands what it costs to close. He wrote in the notebook. He also wrote at the piano in the second studio that had been repurposed for the Ellison Roots artist development sessions, where he taught in the way he had taught in Antioch. Not at, but with, meeting people where they were, rather than where he needed them to be. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. Margot said once, "You understand what it means to have the thing but not the form for it yet. You are patient with the not yet." He thought about that. He thought about Anya, who had kept his music in a notebook in the kitchen drawer because she wanted to have the archive of him. He thought about the patience that required to keep something that is not finished, to hold it with the same care you would hold the finished version, to believe it will be finished. He thought about the last 2 blank bars that had been blank for 18 months. He thought the music was always going to finish. It just needed the right room. Margot Ellison and Joel Baptiste did not rush. This was something they understood without discussing it. That they had both arrived at this point carrying the specific weight of loss that changes your relationship to time. When you have lost someone suddenly, at a point when you expected decades more of them, the idea of rushing toward anything new becomes not just uncomfortable, but structurally wrong. You did not rush toward the next version of your life the way you rush toward deadlines or opportunities. You moved toward it at the speed of trust, which was slower than urgency and more reliable. They had, in the working relationship, built something that was also this other thing, and neither of them was in a hurry to name it before it was ready to be named. The name was not the point. The building was the point. The work was the point. The archive room and the recordings and the Ellison Roots artists who arrived week by week with their half-formed songs and their complete conviction that the songs were worth finishing. Joel taught them the same way he had taught his Antioch students, not at, but with, meeting people where they were rather than where he needed them to be. Margot watched, sometimes, from the doorway of the development studio, not supervising, attending, the way she attended the archive. Being present in the way that someone is present when the thing being done matters to them. He saw her watching once, and she did not look away. He did not look away either. He had been in the building for 14 months when he finally played the finished song on the piano in the development studio, alone, at 8 in the morning before the day started. He had been intending to play it for months. The intention had never converted to action, because the action required something he had been moving toward without being ready to reach. He was ready at 8 in the morning on a Tuesday in August. He sat at the piano and he played the song, and it was exactly what it was. Not perfect, not polished. The thing under the polish. The reason the song mattered that was not reducible to its structure or execution. Margot came in at 8:20. He had not known she was in the building. She stopped in the doorway and listened, and he did not stop. He played to the end. She was quiet for a long time after. Then she said, she would have loved this. He looked at her. She was looking at the piano, not at him. She was looking at the piano the way she looked at recordings, fully, completely, the whole thing in. Yes, he said, she would have. Margot Ellison and Joel Baptiste did not rush. They did not rush in the way of two people who had both learned, from loss and from the specific cost of the things they had carried, that the right pace for something real was not the pace of urgency, but the pace of care. They were in the same building every day. They worked on the same things. The building worked, as Joel had said, and the work was the context. And the context was where things that were going to grow grew, in the specific, unhurried way of the right conditions existing and the growing happening when it happened. Cora, who was 7 by the time of the Ellison Roots launch, and who had been watching both of them with the patient scientific interest she brought to everything, had also been watching the building with the same quality of attention. She had come to Ellison Sound 3 times since the archive room Saturday, once for the spring maintenance window, once when school was canceled for a snow day and Mrs. Nguyen was visiting her daughter, and once simply because she asked. He had told her she could ask when it was a day that worked. She had chosen carefully. She had come on a Saturday in August, the building quiet, and she had gone directly to the archive room and sat on the bench with her drawing pad and drawn narwhals in the particular quality of the room's held silence. She had produced 7 narwhals in 2 hours, all of them with the expressive horns, all of them doing something, navigating, feeling the world, being in the specific element they were built for. She had left them on the reading desk when she left. He had found them after she went home with Mrs. Nguyen for the afternoon. 7 narwhals, the pale blue pencil, the felt world horns. He had kept them all. He had put them in the composition notebook, after the last page, as an appendix of a kind that had no music in it, but that was, he thought, part of the same record. Cora, who was 7 by the time of the Ellison Roots launch, and who had been watching both of them with the patient scientific interest she brought to everything, said on the drive home from the launch event, I think Miss Ellison likes you. Joel looked at her in the rear view. As a friend, Cora clarified, with the dignity of someone being precise. Yes, he said. I think so. Good, she said. She needs more friends. He thought about Margot in the rain van on Division Street, her window coming down, her voice calling his name across the weather. Joel, get in. He thought about the specific decision that had been, as she had said, a beginning. He thought, she offered a ride. She offered it because it was the right thing to do, and she was a person who did the right thing when she could see it clearly. She had no way to know what would come from it. She had just opened the door. He drove home. The March night was clear, the Nashville stars visible above the lights of the city, the mountains invisible in this geography but present in the songs he carried. The songs he was still writing, the songs that were not finished yet and would be. He was writing again. That was the whole story. That was everything.